It was a cold, dark winter evening, and I was home alone for the weekend. My parents had gone out of town, and I was excited to have the house to myself. I had big plans to binge watch my favourite shows, eat junk food, and stay up late. Little did I know that this night would turn into a terrifying experience I would never forget. I settled in the living room, wrapped in a cozy blanket. The house was silent except for the sound of the TV. Around 11 p.m, just as my show was getting intense, I heard a faint knocking sound. At first, I thought it was part of the show, but when I muted the TV, the knocking continued. It was coming from the front door. My heart started to race. I wasn't expecting anyone, and my parents had made it clear that nobody would be visiting. I cautiously approached the door, peeking through the peephole. To my relief, nobody was there. I figured it was probably just the wind, or maybe a branch hitting the door. I went back to the living room, trying to shake off the unease. About an hour later, the knocking started again, this time louder and more persistent. I felt a chill run down my spine. I tiptoed back to the door and looked through the peephole once again. Still nobody was there. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was nothing, but the fear was creeping in. I decided to double check all the locks in the house. As I was checking the back door, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There were muddy footprints on the porch, leading away from the door. Somebody had been there. My mind raced with thoughts of intruders and ghosts. I quickly locked the door and grabbed my phone to call my parents. They reassured me that everything was probably fine, but they suggested I call the neighbours to check on me. My neighbour, Mr. Thompson, came over and looked around the house. He didn't find anything unusual, but he promised to keep an eye out and told me to call him if I heard anything else. Feeling somewhat reassured, I went back inside, locking the door behind me. Just as I was starting to relax, the knocking came again, this time from the window in the kitchen. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst out of my chest. I grabbed a flashlight and with trembling hands approached the window, shining the light outside. I saw nothing but the empty yard. Terrified and unable to sleep, I stayed in the living room with all the lights on. The knocking continued intermittently throughout the night, each time from a different part of the house. I felt like I was being watched, hunted even. When morning finally came, the knocking stopped. I never found out who or what was causing the knocking that night. My parents returned and I told them everything, but they were skeptical. Mr. Thompson kept a closer eye on our house, but the knocking never happened again. To this day, I get chills thinking about that night and the mysterious knocking that haunted me when I was home alone. I was 16 when I experienced something that still haunts me to this day. My parents were out for the night, attending a friend's party, leaving me alone at home. I was used to being home alone and generally enjoyed the freedom. That night, however, was different. After finishing my homework, I decided to watch a movie in the basement. Our basement was partially finished, with a comfy couch, a big TV, and some old family belongings stored in the corner. I settled in with some snacks and turned off the lights for a true cinematic experience. About halfway through the movie, I heard a soft thud coming from behind me. At first, I thought it was just the old house settling, but then I heard it again, a little louder. I paused the movie, listening intently. The basement was eerily silent. I shrugged it off and resumed the movie. A few minutes later, I heard the sound again, followed by what sounded like footsteps. My heart skipped a beat. I muted the TV and strained to listen. The footsteps seemed to be coming closer. Gripped by fear, I turned on the flashlight on my phone and scanned the room. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing only familiar clutter of our basement. I decided to call out, "Hello, is there somebody there?" My voice sounded shaky and small. There was no response, just the heavy silence of the basement. Trying to convince myself it was just my imagination, I resumed the movie, keeping the volume low. Suddenly, I saw a shadow move in the corner of my eye. I turned my head slowly towards the source, my heart pounding in my chest. There, in the dim light from the TV, I saw a dark figure standing near the stairs. It was just standing there, motionless, watching me. My mind raced. Was it a person? A ghost? I couldn't move, frozen with fear. The figure didn't move, it just stood there, as if it was waiting for me to do something. Summoning all my courage, I grabbed my phone and with trembling fingers, dialed 911. I kept my eyes on the figure, whispering to the operator that there was somebody in my house. The operator assured me that help was on the way and advised me to stay on the line and stay hidden. I kept the phone to my ear, backing away slowly towards the back door of the basement. As I moved, the figure seemed to dissolve into the shadows, disappearing as if it had never been there. My heart was still racing when I heard the sound of sirens approaching. I bolted up the stairs and out the back door, running to meet the police. The officers searched the house and found no signs of forced entry or anybody inside. They told me it was probably just my imagination, heightened by being alone in the dark basement. But I knew what I saw. That shadowy figure wasn't a figment of my imagination, it was real. To this day, I can't explain what I saw that night. I never felt comfortable in the basement again and avoid it whenever possible. The memory of that shadowy figure still haunts me, a reminder of a terrifying night when I was home alone. It was a crisp autumn evening, the kind that usually brings comfort with its cool, soothing breeze and the rustling of fallen leaves. I had the house to myself for the weekend. My parents were visiting my grandmother, and I had declined the trip, opting for some quiet time to catch up on schoolwork. Little did I know, the serenity would soon morph into something sinister. I settled on the couch with my books and a cup of hot chocolate, fully immersed in my reading. The silence was only interrupted by the occasional creak of the old house, which I had grown accustomed to. Hours slipped by, and as the night deepened, an unsettling feeling began to creep in. The wind outside had picked up, howling through the trees, making the house feel even more isolated. Around midnight, I decided to call it a night. I turned off the lights downstairs and headed to my room. As I was brushing my teeth, I heard a faint noise, like soft tapping, coming from the kitchen. I paused, listening intently, but it stopped. I shrugged it off, convincing myself it was just the wind playing tricks on my mind. Back in my room, I crawled into bed and tried to ignore the sense of unease. I just started to drift off when the tapping resumed, louder this time. My heart raced as I strained to hear over the pounding in my chest. It was coming from the back door. Gathering my courage, I decided to investigate. I tiptoed downstairs, each step an eternity. The tapping grew more intense. When I reached the kitchen, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the light switch. I flicked it on, illuminating the empty room. The back door stood in the shadows, the tapping now relentless drumming. Summoning my last bit of bravery, I approached the door and peeked through the curtains. My blood ran cold. A face stared back at me, pale and gaunt, eyes wide with an unnatural intensity. The man's mouth moved as if he was speaking, but I couldn't hear any word through the glass. I stumbled back, heart hammering in my chest. He kept tapping, his movement frantic. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands trembling so violently I could barely press the buttons. The operator's calm voice was a lifeline in the chaos. I explained the situation, trying to move my voice steadily. She assured me that help was on the way and advised me to stay on the line. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, clutching the phone to my ear. The man's tapping turned to banging, and I could see him shaking the door handle, trying to force his way in. I backed into a corner, hoping the police would arrive before he managed to break through. Suddenly, the banging stopped. Silence engulfed the house, thick and oppressive. I strained to hear any sign of movement, but there was nothing. I wondered if he had given up and left. The relief was short-lived, as then I heard the unmistakable sound of shattering glass from the living room. I bolted up the stairs, slamming my bedroom door and locking it. I barricaded myself with whatever furniture I could move, my heart pounding in my ears. The operator's voice was a distant hum as I focused on the sounds of the intruder moving through the house. Then I heard sirens, their wail a beacon of hope. Within moments, flashing lights flooded the front of the yard. The police had arrived. I heard them shouting commands, followed by the sound of a struggle. After what felt like an eternity, the house fell silent once more. A knock on my door made me jump. "It's the police, you're safe now," a voice called out. I moved the barricade and unlocked the door, lapsing into their arms. They had apprehended the intruder, a deranged man who had escaped from a nearby psychiatric facility. As they led him away, his eyes locked into mine, filling with a chilling intensity. "I'll be back," he whispered, his voice haunting me long after he was gone. The storm rolled in suddenly, dark clouds swallowing the late afternoon sun and casting the house into an eerie gloom. I had always loved the sound of rain, but this storm felt different, menacing. I was home alone for the weekend. My roommate had gone to visit his family. It seemed like the perfect time to indulge into a movie marathon. Thunder rumbled in the distance as I settled on the couch, the living room dimly lit by the flickering of the TV. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. I tried to lose myself in the film, but an uneasy feeling came over me. It was as if the house was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Halfway through the second movie, I heard a faint noise, a soft thud coming from above. I paused the film, straining to listen. Silence. I told myself it was just the house settling, an old building prone to random noises. I hit play, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. A few minutes later, the thud came again, louder this time. My pulse quickened. It was definitely coming from the attic. I debated whether to investigate or call somebody. Well, who would I call? My roommate was hours away. I didn't want to seem paranoid. Summoning my courage, I grabbed a flashlight and headed towards the attic door. The creaky wooden stairs protested under my weight as I ascended. The air grew colder with each step, a chill that raised goosebumps on my skin. At the top, I paused and listened. Nothing. I pushed open the attic door, the hinges squealing in protest. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating dusty boxes and old furniture. I stepped inside, my breath visible in the frigid air. The silence was oppressive, thick with anticipation. I swept the light around, finding nothing out of the ordinary. As I turned to leave, a loud crash echoed from the far corner of the attic. I spun around, heart pounding, the flashlight beam shaking in my trembling hand. There, half hidden behind an old wardrobe, something moved. I froze, staring at the shadowy figure. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice barely a whisper. No response. I took a hesitant step forward, the floorboards creaking beneath me. The figure shifted, and I realized it was just a stack of boxes that had fallen. Relief washed over me, mingled with embarrassment at my overactive imagination. I turned to leave again, but then I heard it, a soft, shuffling noise, like footsteps. My blood ran cold, as I wasn't alone. The beam of my flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows. The footsteps grew louder, coming closer. I backed towards the door, heart racing. Just as I reached for the handle, the flashlight went out, plunging the attic into darkness. Panic surged through me. I fumbled with the flashlight, desperately trying to turn it back on. The footsteps stopped, replaced by soft whispering, indistinct and chilling. I bolted, tripping down the stairs and slamming the attic door behind me. I locked it, my hands shaking. The whispering continued, seeping through the wood, an unintelligible murmur that set my nerves on edge. I grabbed my phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. The operator's calm voice was a lifeline. I explained the situation, struggling to keep my voice steady. She assured me that the officers were on their way and advised me to stay on the line. Minutes felt like hours as I huddled in the living room, listening to the whispers from the attic. Finally, I heard the sirens approaching. The police arrived, their presence a welcome relief. They searched the attic thoroughly, but found no one. The whispers had stopped, leaving only the eerie silence. The officers couldn't explain the noises, attributing them to the storm and my imagination. They offered to stay until I felt safe, but I declined, too embarrassed to admit how scared I'd been. As they left, one of the officers paused. "Sometimes, old houses have their way of playing tricks on you," he said with a knowing look. I nodded, but deep down, I knew it was more than just a trick. The whispers in the attic weren't my imagination. They were a warning, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was up there was still watching, waiting for the next storm to come. It was a typical Friday night. My parents had gone out for their weekly date night, leaving me alone in our creaky old house. I had the usual routine: microwave some popcorn, turn on Netflix, and binge watch some horror movies. Ironically, I had chosen to watch The Conjuring, thinking it would be a fun scare. Little did I know, my night was about to become a real-life horror show. Around 11 p.m, I started hearing strange noises. At first, I dismissed them as the usual sounds of an old house settling, but something about them felt off. It was the usual creaks and groans. It was more like soft whispers, almost too faint to hear, but persistent enough to send chills down my spine. I paused the movie and strained to listen. It was silent. I laughed at myself, chalking it up to an overactive imagination and too many horror flicks. I resumed the movie, trying to immerse myself back into the fictional horror. Just as I was getting comfortable again, the whispers returned. This time, they were louder and more distinct, like somebody was muttering right behind me. My heart raced as I slowly turned around, half expecting to see someone standing there, but there was no one. The room was empty, yet the whispers continued. I grabbed my phone and texted my best friend, "Hey, something weird's going on, can you come over?" He replied almost immediately, "Sure, I'll be there in 15. Relieved, I tried to convince myself that everything was fine. I decided to check the house to make sure I really was alone. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen and started inspections. I went room by room, flipping on the lights and checking closets. Every room was empty, but the whispers seemed to follow me, growing louder with each step. When I reached the basement door, I hesitated. The whispers were the loudest here, almost beckoning me to come down. I steeled myself, slowly descending down the creaky wooden stairs. The basement was dark and damp, filled with old boxes and forgotten items. I swung the flashlight around, trying to find the source of the noise. In the far corner, I noticed something odd. One of the old storage boxes was open, its contents spilled onto the floor. Among the clutter, I saw a dusty, old book. I picked it up and brushed off the cobwebs. The cover was blank, but it felt strangely cold to the touch. Curious and unnerved, I opened it. The pages were filled with bizarre symbols and ancient-looking texts that I couldn't understand. Suddenly, the basement door shut, plunging me into darkness. I dropped the book and fumbled for the flashlight, but it wouldn't turn back on. Panic set in as I scrambled up the stairs, banging on the door and yelling for help. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, as they were inside my head. Just as I was about to lose hope, the door burst open, and Jake, my friend, was stood there, wide-eyed and breathless. "What the hell is going on?" he asked, pulling me out of the basement. We stumbled into the living room, slamming the door behind us. I tried to explain what happened, but the words wouldn't come out. Jake grabbed the flashlight and cautiously opened the basement door. He shined the light down the stairs, revealing the old book lying on the floor. He picked it up and flipped through the pages, his face growing pale. "We need to get rid of this," he said, his voice trembling. "I've seen this kind of stuff before. It's not good." Without another word, we took the book outside and set it on fire. As the flames consumed it, the whispers finally stopped. We stood there in silence, watching the book turn to ash. The night was eerily quiet, and for the first time in hours, I felt a sense of peace. When my parents came home, I didn't mention what happened. Jake and I made a pact to keep it between us. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't shake that feeling that something had changed. The house was still the same, but I knew it held dark secrets. I vowed to never go into the basement again, and I hoped that whatever evil was there had burnt away with the book. I've always found the sound of rain soothing. Tonight, though, it was different. The rain pounding against the windows, each drop sounding like an unwelcome intruder trying to get inside. I was alone in the house, nestled on the couch, with a blanket and a cup of tea, trying to distract myself with a movie. The old Victorian house, inherited from my grandmother, creaked and groaned with the wind. I'd spent a few weekends restoring it, but it still felt like it had secrets hidden in the walls. I paused the movie to get a snack from the kitchen. As I walked through the dimly lit hallway, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The portraits of long-gone relatives seemed to follow me with their eyes. I shook off the unease and opened the fridge, its bright light momentarily blinding me. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from upstairs. My heart leaped into my throat. I stood there, frozen, clutching the fridge door. The house was supposed to be empty. I forced myself to breathe and grab the knife from the counter. Step by step, ascending the stairs, the knife clutched tightly in my trembling hand. The hallway upstairs was dark, except for the faint light coming from the room at the end, my grandmother's old study. I crept towards the door, the wooden floorboards creaking under my weight. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see a flickering light inside. Taking a breath, I pushed the door open with the tip of my knife. The study was empty, but the desk lamp was on, casting eerily shadows around the walls. Papers were scattered across the floor, and the rocking chair in the corner was slowly moving back and forth. I knew I hadn't left it like this. My grandmother's journal lay on the open desk, its pages fluttering as if it was caught in a breeze. I stepped into the room, trying to make sense of the chaos. As I reached for the journal, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, knife ready, but there was no one there. The room grew colder, and I could see my breath in the air. A low whisper filled the room, though I couldn't make out the words. It was as if the house itself was speaking to me. A sudden gust of wind extinguished the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. Panic set in as I fumbled for my phone, using its flashlight to navigate my way out. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to be coming from the walls surrounding me. I finally managed to open the door and stumbled into the hallway, slamming it shut behind me. My breathing was ragged, and my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to get out of the house. As I hurried down the stairs, I could hear footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate. I raced to the front door, but it wouldn't budge. The lock was stuck, as if the house itself was keeping me inside. Desperation took over, and I ran to the back door, throwing it open and escaping into the rain. I couldn't stop running until I reached the safety of my car. From the driveway, I looked back at the house. The light in the study was back on, and the rocking chair was still moving. I could see a figure standing in the window, watching me. It was an old woman, her face pale and eyes hollow. My grandmother. The rain seemed to fall harder as I sped away, my mind racing. I didn't know what I'd experienced, but I knew I couldn't go back. The house had secrets, dark and twisted, and it wasn't ready to let them go. That night, I checked into a motel and locked the door behind me. The sound of rain on the roof was no longer soothing. It was a reminder of what I had just left behind. I didn't sleep, my mind replaying the events over and over. The house had a story to tell, but I wasn't sure I wanted to hear it. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and check out my other horror stories on the screen now. And until next time, sleep tight.